a CIA document from 1986 talking about why America needs to lessen its support. And this document was written by a CIA analyst by the name of Hal Ford for Israel. And you can see here, Hal Ford, Vice Chairman, National Intelligence Council. And the title of this analysis is A Dark Long-Range Future for Israel. He is saying it is bad for America to have this emphatic alliance with Israel. America needs to become a little bit more heavy-handed on Israel if the alliance is going to continue in a healthy way. Because he says, if we continue this hardcore support for Israel, he says Israel will continue to become more and more belligerent, and Israel will be more and more difficult to control. And so because Israel will be more difficult to control, Israel will do things that are very reckless and that will damage America's alliances in the Middle East. And it'll ruin America's position in the Middle East. And so what Mr. Hal Ford is here saying is America needs to lessen its support for Israel. It needs to bring down its support for Israel. Because if it doesn't, Israel will ruin America's position in the Middle East. Everything bad that Israel will do will be blamed on the United States. It will reflect on the United States in a very, very negative way. My point of me bringing this up is to show you guys that not everyone in the U.S. government is on board with this very, very strong, indiscriminate alliance that America has with Israel. There are people in the CIA who hate Israel. They are people in the CIA who hate this unfettered alliance between the United States and Israel. For example, you have people like John Kiriakou. John Kiriakou was a CIA agent, and he has said numerous times that there are people in the CIA who do not like Israel. In fact, he said that Israel was very unpopular in the CIA, and that CIA agents didn't mind going to Riyadh. They didn't mind going to one of these Arab Gulf states, but they did not want to work in Israel because the Israelis were always trying to take information from the CIA. They were always trying to steal information, and they would also very cruelly and sadistically bully CIA agents. So, for example, he has the story of this CIA agent and his wife, who was also a CIA agent, and they were working in Israel. They were working, I think, in Tel Aviv, and the Mossad would just send agents into their home when they weren't there, and they would do things like they would take dumps in all the toilets. They took their dog one time and cut the dog's tail off and then sewed the tail back in, just to show the Americans, we can go into your home anytime we want and do this to you. And it was a way of psychological control. It was a way to psychologically torment the Americans. And so John Kiriakou recounts these stories to demonstrate the tensions between the Israelis, really between the Mossad and the CIA, but also to demonstrate why the CIA does not like Israel to a great extent. So it says here in this document, quote, this is what Mr. Hal Ford said. I am concerned that the long-term outlook for Israel and for U.S. interests relating to Israel may be much more troubled than the U.S. intelligence and policy-making communities have yet appreciated. Attention has been drawn to certain of the discrete problems Israel faces, but the long-term challenge of Israel's many problems has not yet been recognized in either their totality, cumulative force, or very serious implication for the United States. Principal erosion forces. 1. A potential for rising instability. This is very interesting. Distorted budgets and severe inflationary pressures. The absence of political consensus. Indeed, the increase of divisions within the Likud party as well as between it and labor. So he's talking about how there's going to be a lot of division between the Labor Party and the Likud Party, and how this is going to bring instability in Israel. Look at Israel right now. You have this massive tension between the right and the left. So you have this massive battle over what's going to happen to the Supreme Court, what's going to happen to the judicial branch of the Israeli government. You have the you have the Israeli right that wants to really render the authority of the Israeli Supreme Court to be utterly useless. And then you have the other side, which wants to preserve the authority of the Supreme Court. And so the right wing, they want to weaken, or they want to render the authority of the Supreme Court to be really useless, because they don't want the Supreme Court to hinder any of their political or their ideological or religious aspirations. So for example, they want to build a third temple. Well, if they want to build a third temple, maybe the Knesset will one day pass a bill saying, yeah, let's build a third temple, or let's build a synagogue on the Temple Mount right next to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. If the Israeli Supreme Court is still authoritative, if it still has authority, if it still has weight to its decision making, the Supreme Court could intervene and say, no, this is not what Israel is about. We're not going to allow this. This goes against the morals of Israel. This goes against our interests, because when Israel was established as a country, the idea was for the Muslims to have the Al-Aqsa Mosque so as to prevent religious chaos and instability within Israel. And you can't do this. If you remove the Supreme Court and all you have is the Knesset, then all the right wing has to do is just take over the Knesset. All that it has to do is just be the majority faction in the Knesset, and then it'll be able to pass whatever it wants without any sort of external hindrance. And so you have this massive political divide in Israel over what is going to happen to the Supreme Court. And if the right wing gets what it wants, the Supreme Court will be rendered useless, and the right wing will be able to pass any laws that it wants if it just takes over the Knesset at that point. So you do have massive political division in Israel, and what is keeping Israel together is the war with Iran. That is it. If you have no war in Israel, then all of that political contention, all of that political instability will come back. Bottom line, it will come back. And so if you have this massive political instability in Israel, and you have right-wingers killing left-wingers, and you have a huge amount of murders being done against Arabs and against Palestinians, then the Arab Gulf countries will say, hey, America, do something about this. Why aren't you doing something about this? Israel is under your control. You have the authority to stop this. And then America will say, Israel, you have to stop this. And then Israel's going to say, well, okay, we'll be nice. And then Israel will go back doing the same thing. And so that political instability will act as a justification, or it will provide grist to the political faction that wants right-wing and or religious violence. And so what's going to stop Israel from becoming more and more insane? If you have political instability, it's going to get worse. And anything bad that happens in Israel, or anything bad that Israel does, is always blamed on the United States. Israel will do something horrendous, and the world will blame America, because America is in control over Israel, supposedly. And how long is America going to be taking the blame for everything that Israel does? For how long is America going to be the sponge to absorb all of the blame for Israel's wrongdoing? Eventually, America is going to pull out of this whole alliance with Israel. So it says here, the growth of religious fundamentalism. What is happening in Israel? All of this talk about building a third temple, all of this talk about red heifers and wanting to pray on the Temple Mount and wanting to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and all of this talk is what? It's the intensification of Jewish religious fanaticism in Israel. So Hal Ford, this CIA analyst, the CIA agent, wrote in 1986, America It's time to cut the weight of Israel off. It's time to relieve ourselves of this burden called Israel. Because if we don't, what is going to happen when Jewish fanaticism becomes more fanatical? What is going to happen when religious fundamentalism increases in Israel to the point where the Jewish fanatics start becoming more and more reckless and start killing more people and start slaughtering Arabs on the streets and they start raping Arabs, and they're already doing that. And what are we going to do when these fanatics start talking about building a third temple? How is this going to make America look good in the world scene? How is this going to make the American global empire look legitimate? Because everything bad Israel does is blamed on America, because Israel is America's responsibility. And if Israel goes down the path of the Sanhedrin, if Israel goes down the same path of those religious leaders who called for Jesus' crucifixion, it will be blamed on Israel. And if you have fanatics butchering Arabs on the streets, and if you have fanatics beginning to work on this construction of a third temple, it's going to be blamed on America. And does America want the blame for that sort of insanity? Does America want to hold up the burden of all of the madness of Israel? That is the question. And so Hal Ford was saying, you can't be doing this all the time, America. You can't be continuing on with this emphatic, indiscriminate, unfettered alliance with Israel, in which Israel has no pushback and Israel has no consequences. You can't be doing this because it's going to be to your detriment, America. And so what this proves is that there is indeed a faction within the American intelligence apparatus that is against Israel. And the fact that Joe Kent came out, and this guy was a massive intelligence director, he came out against Israel, proves this whole point. There is indeed not only a rift between America and Israel, there is a rift between the American intelligence apparatus. There is a rift within the Pentagon over Israel. There is a factional war going on in America over what to do with this thing called Israel. What do we do with it? Do we continue doing what we've been doing for decades? Do we continue doing the John Hagee policy of just worshiping Israel? Do we continue to do what Hucksterby wants to do? What do we do? Because if we continue down the same path, if we continue to tread upon the same road that we have been treading upon for decades, then the entire Middle East is going to be engulfed in this horrendous conflagration of fire and oil and natural gas. It's going to continue to spiral downwards into horrendous war in which millions could die. Or we can tell Israel to go piss off and put a leash on it and say, no, that's it. No more of this nonsense. If America cuts ties off completely with Israel, Israel will go mask off. That's another thing that you have to keep in mind. Israel will go mask off and say, there is no point in even pretending to be nice. Let's just go full on Third Temple Sanhedrin insanity. But America will say, the blood on Israel's hands is no longer on our hands. And America will pull a Pontius Pilate and say, I wash my hands of this. Israel, whatever evils you want to do, whatever butchery you want to do, I wash my hands from it. And the evils of Israel called for Christ's crucifixion. And Pilate said, I see no fault in this man. And they said, crucify him, crucify him. And Rome had an alliance with the Judeans. There was a treaty that was signed in the time of the Maccabees. You can read about it in the book of Maccabees. The Romans agreed to defend Judea in the case of Judea being invaded. And the Judeans agreed to militarily fight for Rome in the case of Rome going to war. There was really an ancient version of a NATO agreement that was done, that was established between the Americans and between the Romans and the Judeans. And so they had this alliance. The Jewish religious establishment was very influential. They had a lobby to the point where Pontius Pilate said, why do you guys want to kill Jesus? I see no fault in this man. This man has not done anything that would warrant him being crucified. What are you guys talking about? And they said, crucify him, crucify him. And they told Pontius Pilate, if you do not crucify Jesus, we will go to the Caesar and we will tell the Caesar that a terrorist uprising is being done in Judea against the Roman government. And it is being led by a man who declares himself to be the king of Judea, when the reality is that the only king over Judea is Caesar. We have no king but Caesar. And you, Pontius Pilate, you will be implicated in all this, because we're going to say that you have done nothing against this rebel leader named Jesus. And you will be implicated and you will be punished. And it just may be your head on the chopping block. And Pilate acquiesced to the demands of the lobby. He acquiesced. He submitted to the demands of the lobby. And Christ was crucified. So you look at all that, and if you were living in that time period, you would think, oh my goodness, look, there's an alliance between Rome and Judea. Rome is acquiescing to the demands of this Jewish lobby. They murdered this innocent man at the behest of this evil Jewish lobby. Rome will always be a slave that Israel will ride on. And what happened in the end? The hubris of the synagogue was so high, the arrogance was so strong, that the synagogue thought that they could block the Caesar himself from having a sacrifice in the temple. The synagogue, the government of the Second Temple, issued a decree saying that no foreigner will be allowed to make a sacrifice in the temple, including the Caesar himself. And the Caesar declared war and said, no. Actually, no. It was the other way around. That was a declaration of war on the Caesar. And Caesar said, okay, we have a war. And a war was commenced. And Judea was destroyed. The temple was destroyed. And so now what do we see? We see what? We see this thing called Israel. It has an alliance with America. It's very powerful. It has a very strong lobby. Israel butchered all of these people in Gaza, and America, like Pilate, did not stop it. But what's going to happen eventually? What's going to happen eventually is what has always happened. And what has always happened is Israel in the end gets defeated. And the fact that you have this faction within America's intelligence apparatus that says it's time to really end this alliance with Israel. It's time to end the way that we have been conducting this alliance with Israel. And the fact that that voice within the American intelligence apparatus is growing louder and louder. And it's getting louder than the pro-Israel voices. It's getting louder than Mark Levine. It's getting louder than Jonathan Greenblatt. It's getting louder than Ben Shapiro. It's getting louder than Josh Hammer. The fact that the voices of people like Tucker and Kent are louder than the pro-Israel voices tells me that in the future, the voices of the pro-Israel people are going to be drowned out by those who are against Israel. And Israel will eventually face its final boss. Israel will eventually face this Turco-Iranian axis, Turkish-Iranian alliance. And that will be a war that Israel will try to pull America into. And it's not going to work because America is not going to go to war against the second biggest member of NATO. It says here, the growth of Arab terrorism within Israel and the West Bank. Now, he does not mention Gaza, but we had 10/7. And 10/7 was a terrorist attack that was done by Hamas. Hamas came from Gaza. They went into Israel and they did a terrorist attack. And they massacred people and they killed IDF soldiers and they also killed civilians. And so what Hal Ford is here saying is Palestinian terrorism is going to increase. And then what will happen inevitably is a brutal Israeli reaction to that terrorism. That's exactly what happened with Gaza. You had 10/7, and then you had Israel's murderous reaction to 10/7, which consisted of Israel slaughtering at least 100,000 people, if not hundreds of thousands of people. So Hal Ford goes on to say, a potential for increasing Israeli hawkishness, this too resulting from various trends, the possibility of hardening Israeli attitudes towards any West Bank accommodation, the de facto ending of any realistic movement on the part of either Israelis, Jordan, or the PLO toward a negotiated settlement of the Palestinian problem. In response to continuing and probably heightened anti-Israel terrorism on the part of various Arab elements, an almost certain rise of occasional Israeli raids and preemptive armed actions. Well, that's exactly what happened with Operation Cast Lead. You had Operation Cast Lead, which happened years before 10/7. Operation Cast Lead. There was a ceasefire that was agreed upon between Hamas and Israel, and Israel decided to assassinate several Hamas officials, and Israel broke the ceasefire. Israel broke the ceasefire and said, well, it was a preemptive attack. This is exactly what Hal Ford was warning about. And then what happened? Years later, in 2023, you had 10/7. You had the 10/7 attack done by Hamas, and then Israel responded with what? Hawkishness. Israel responded with what? Military expansionism. Israel responded with what? With genocide. And so what Hal Ford was warning about was, you're going to have Palestinian insurgency, and because you are inevitably going to have Palestinian insurgency, the Israelis are going to respond with killing and with preemptive strikes on the Palestinians. And so this is not going to make America look good. This is going to make America look bad. It's going to make America look terrible. Do we want to continue to hold up the burden of every evil that Israel does? That is what Hal Ford was asking. This is what Hal Ford was trying to get people to answer. And Hal Ford was saying, if we're going to continue this alliance in a healthy manner, we have to become critical of Israel when Israel does wrong, and we have to also hinder Israel from being reckless. Has America done this? To a certain extent, but not to the extent that it should have. And because of that, we are paying the consequences. Everything evil and reckless that America does, America gets blamed for it. And the question is, does America want to just make this sort of thing last forever? Does America want this burden to last forever? The Joe Kents, the Tuckers, their voices are rising up for a reason. It's because Americans are tired of holding up the burden of Israel, and they're tired of doing the work of Israel. A long-term erosion of Israel's regional military supremacy. So Hal Ford was saying you're going to see the erosion of Israel's regional supremacy. That is what has been occurring within recent years. Turkey has a very powerful military, and it's getting stronger. America is entertaining the idea of selling F-35s to the Turks. The Turks are on their way to having their very first indigenously made fighter jet become operational by, I want to say, 2029 or the 2030s. So the Turkish military is rising up. Iran has the ability to nuke Israel. Iran has the capacity to bomb Israel, as we have been seeing since 2024. And as we are seeing right now, Iran has this capability. And Israel does not have the ability to defeat Iran in a conventional war. So we are seeing the decline of the aura of the Israeli military. We are seeing the decline of this facade of Israel having the most supreme military in the Middle East. And we also saw that in Lebanon. When Israel decided to invade Lebanon, I want to say in 2008, hundreds of IDF soldiers were killed. And the Israelis were not even able to get to the Litani River because the Israelis want to control all of the territory in Lebanon from the Israeli border all the way up to the Litani River. And the Israelis tried to take that territory in the last Israeli-Lebanese war. And then what happened was the Israelis, they didn't even fight Hezbollah. This is the big misconception that people have. They say, Israel fought Hezbollah. Israel did not fight Hezbollah fighters directly. Israel was fighting the proxy of Hezbollah. They were fighting the Shiite proxy militias who were fighting at the behest of Hezbollah. Hezbollah told the Shiite militias that were not even part of Hezbollah to fight the Israelis. The Shiite militias fought the Israelis when they invaded Lebanon, and the Israelis withdrew out of Lebanon before they could even reach Hezbollah's fighters at the Litani River. The Israelis were not even able to make it to the Litani River to fight Hezbollah. And by the time they withdrew, already hundreds of Israeli soldiers had been killed by the Shiite militias, who were not even members of Hezbollah. So that also demonstrated that Israel is really not as strong as a lot of these evangelicals think it is. The main problem of the Israelis, which they also impose on the United States, is their perception that they must be so strong that no one will ever even consider any kind of attack. If the Israelis lose anything in a limited conflict, they consider this psychologically unacceptable to their strategic superiority, a definition of security few nations can afford to maintain or even attempt to justify. So the Israeli philosophy is they can never be defeated in any way. Not psychologically, not physically. They can never be defeated in any way. If Turkey has a fighter jet that can beat the F-35, they need a fighter jet that can defeat Turkey's fighter jet. That's how this works. If Gaza launches fireworks into Israel, even if they don't kill anyone, that's it. They have to pulverize everything, kill tens of thousands of people, the whole thing. So the Israeli mentality is, if you hit me even by a little bit, I'm going to hit you harder. If you're better at me in one aspect of warfare, I have to get better at you in that aspect of warfare. Israel has to be superior in every aspect over all of its neighbors. It has to be superior to all of its neighbors in every single field, be it economic, be it military, be it technologically. It has to be superior. But the thing is that this is not really the case. Hezbollah was able to slaughter hundreds of IDF. 1,000 IDF soldiers were killed in the war with Hamas. Israel cannot defeat Iran without America's help. Israel is being bombed. Israel's missile interceptors are not able to intercept all of Iran's missiles. Israel was not able to defeat the Houthis. I mean, Israel doesn't have this superior position that it thinks it has. So what is going to happen when it comes to this full realization? It's going to lash out ferociously, violently. It's going to lash out. So it says here, implications for the United States. The potential of being tied to a more unstable, vulnerable, and volatile Israeli ally. Woo! You see, this is exactly what I was telling you guys. There are people in the CIA who are saying, and who have been saying for decades. I mean, this was written in 1986. But they are people in the CIA who say, maintaining this hardcore alliance, maintaining this very deep alliance with Israel, to the point where Israel is barely even restrained or criticized, is not healthy for America, because now we are tied to this fanatical state. And anything evil that Israel does is going to reflect on us. Do we want that burden? That's the thing. Do we want that burden? And I don't think America wants that burden anymore. And the clearest demonstration of this burden is this war with Iran. That is the clearest demonstration. Because look at how it unfolded. Look at how it began. Israel was going to hit Iran without America. America knew that Iran was going to retaliate by hitting the American bases. America felt like it needed to go into war. Israel pulled America into the war. Now America is in this war. Now the Strait of Hormuz is being blocked. Now America doesn't have freedom of movement through the Strait of Hormuz. Now America has to withdraw its naval armada from Japan. It has to withdraw its THAAD system from South Korea. It can no longer be in charge completely of the security of Japan against the North Koreans and the Chinese. China is getting what it wants, which is the lessening of America's military presence in its neighbors, Japan and South Korea. So now China is winning. Iran is selling oil to China, and they're receiving yuans. The petrodollar is weakening. Russia is being relieved of the oil sanctions that America was imposing on it. Russia's making bank. So China's winning, Russia's winning, Iran is looking more and more prestigious. The Islamic world is worshiping Iran. Iranian oil is able to go through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is making tons of money. America's oil tankers have been bombed by Iranian drones. And all of this because America got dragged into a war by Israel. That is a burden. And so the question that people like Hal Ford were asking, the question that Joe Kent is asking, the question that Tucker Carlson is asking is, how long are we going to hold up this burden? Because look at what's happening now. We're going through this energy crisis, which is forcing us into an economic crisis because Israel dragged us into a war. I think it's best that we cut ties off with Israel. That is the argument that is being made. And there were people as far back as 1986 in the CIA who were saying this. So it says here, the prospect of that ally becoming even more dependent on U.S. assistance at a time when the United States will find it much more difficult to sustain Israel and other allies economically and militarily. That is exactly what's happening now. America is dealing with this war to protect the Arabs, to protect the Gulf states. They're trying to protect the oil depots. Israel doesn't give a shit. They're bombing the oil depots. It's not just Iran who's bombing the oil depots. It's the Israelis too. They're bombing the oil depots against America's interests. So America's trying to protect the oil depots. They're trying to protect the natural gas field in Qatar. Israel is causing more and more problems. They bombed the gas field. Iran retaliated by bombing Qatar's part of the gas field. And so America is running out of THAAD missiles. They had to divert THAAD missiles from South Korea, jeopardizing South Korea's position against China and strengthening China's position in Northeast Asia, thus weakening America's position in Northeast Asia and strengthening China's, all because Israel wants this war. This is a burden. That's the conclusion that people are coming to. This is a very dangerous burden. And America is really showing its limits. The war that Israel pulled the U.S. into is showing its limits. It's forcing America to expose all of its limits. Okay, we have THAAD missiles in South Korea, divert those THAAD missiles. We got a naval armada in Okinawa, divert that naval armada, bring it into the Middle East. But I thought we were supposed to be prioritizing China in our foreign policy. I thought we were supposed to be prioritizing our shadow war against the Chinese. Well, that's going to have to be paused for right now. China, can you help us, please? America is begging China for help. Russia, we're going to lift the sanctions on your oil. Iran, we're going to do the same thing to you. Literally lifting the sanctions on Iran just to relieve itself from the energy pressures caused by this war. This is the clearest example I have ever seen of how this pro-Israel policy is a massive burden on America. This is the clearest example I've ever seen. And so Hal Ford was warning that the implications for America will be that America will be burdened by having Israel's security as its responsibility. What happens when America can no longer sustain this security umbrella? What happens when America can no longer be responsible for Israel's security and for the security of the Arab Gulf states? What's going to happen? All of these limits, all of these weaknesses have been exposed. So the question now is, what happens when this war is over? What's going to happen? There's going to be a massive, massive debate over America's relationship with Israel. And the anti-Israel people are eventually going to drown out the pro-Israel people. And eventually America will come to the decision to just abandon Israel. That's what I think is going to happen. So it says here, because of continuing close ties to Israel, a prospect of increasing Arab hostility to the United States. Arab hostility to the United States because of America's alliance with Israel. That's what's happening right now. These Arab Gulf states are saying, because of your bases, we are now a target. And because of this war that Israel wanted, we are now a target. So yes, this is causing more and more hostility by the Arab states towards the United States. Absolutely. U.S. facilities and personnel will be the target of Arab terrorism on a continuing and probably growing scale. U.S. policies will meanwhile encounter increasing flack from moderate or previously moderate Arab governments. That's what's happening right now. Now, is there Arab terrorism against Americans? Yeah, there has been a lot of Arab terrorism against America's military in Iraq and in Syria. But also, moderate Arab governments are getting very frustrated with us. We have proven that we're not exactly entirely reliable. Not only that, but our U.S. bases in these Arab countries make these Arab countries into targets for the Iranians. So Israel starts a war, drags America into it. The Arab Gulf states become the targets. America has to hold up the burden of the security of Israel and these Arab countries. It's exactly what Hal Ford warned about. It's exactly what this guy warned about, almost to the T. What Hal Ford was saying was, do we really want to go through this? And right now, we're going through this. We're going through what Hal Ford warned about. And so the anti-Israel sentiment in this country is going to skyrocket. And because of this war, it's going to skyrocket even more. It's going to skyrocket up to the fucking sky. Because as I've said, Israel already lost the Democrats when it exterminated the Gazans. When it butchered the Gazans, it lost the vast majority of the Democrats. Now, if you look at the percentage of Democrats who support Israel, it's literally in the single digit numbers. It's in the single digits. The vast majority of, not the vast, but the majority of Republicans still support Israel. But that's going to go down. Because what pisses off the Republicans is a foreign country having control over us. A foreign country having undue influence over us. That's what pisses off the Republicans. So the Republicans see this. They see Marco Cain Rubio said, Israel dragged us into this. Oh my God, a foreign country has that much power over us? And so now you're going to start seeing more and more Republicans abandoning Israel. Continuing U.S. inability to restrain Israel from dramatic unilateral military forays, yet continuing widespread blame for the consequences of our alleged puppets' initiatives. Hello! He's saying Israel is the puppet. And he's saying that Israel is going to become more and more reckless, more and more unrestrained, and America is going to lose its ability to restrain Israel. That is what's happening. That is what's happening. I mean, this guy was able to predict the future more or less with pinpoint accuracy in 1986. And this is why I find it very difficult to believe that the Trump administration didn't know what was going to happen if they started a war against Iran. It doesn't make any sense. When you have intelligence agents like Hal Ford saying in 1986, pretty much exactly what is happening now, they know what's going to happen in the future. They know. They study the geopolitics of all these situations. They study history. They know how countries are going to respond to certain actions. They know what's going to happen more or less. I do not believe this nonsense that America didn't know what was going to happen if they started a war against Iran. But this guy, Hal Ford, in 1986, this CIA agent wrote, Israel is going to become more and more unrestrainable. So what is America going to do? And everything reckless, everything destructive that Israel is going to do will be blamed on us, the U.S. So again, do we want to continue to uphold this burden? The evangelicals say yes. The majority of Americans say no. So he speaks of severe policy dilemmas for the Americans, for the United States. America being caught between conflicting interests concerning our Israeli ally and oil. Now, this prediction is not exactly, it's not being said with pinpoint accuracy because he's saying in the event of an Arab-Israeli war. Well, right now there is no Arab-Israeli war. There is an Israeli-Persian war that is happening. But still, look at what's happening here. He's saying that we're going to be caught in between conflicting interests concerning our Israeli ally, oil, and moderate Arab states. What do you see happening now? You have a war between Israel and Iran, and you have conflicting interests between the Americans and the Israelis over what? Over oil. over natural gas. America tells Israel, don't hit the oil depots. Israel hits the oil depots. America tells Israel, don't hit the gas fields. Israel hits the gas fields. America tells Israel, don't bomb Qatar. Israel bombs Qatar. Conflicting interests over oil and over moderate Arab states. That's what's happening right now. And he also says that this is going to lead to a divided U.S. public. Divided on what? Israel. And that's what's happening right now. Right now, Israel is one of the most contentious issues in American political discourse. Right now. Right now. Israel is one of the biggest topics right now in American political discourse. Do we continue to support Israel? And it's happening in the midst of what? In the midst of a conflict between the Americans and the Israelis over oil. How to treat the oil and how to maintain the balance for diplomacy with our moderate Arab government allies. And so he says here, in sum, unless present patterns are changed markedly, close and increasing ties with our Israeli ally will, over the long run, probably confront the United States with substantially more expense, risk, diplomatic isolation, and Soviet pressure from the Near East. Now, again, he was writing this in the Cold War, so he's talking about the Soviets. But just replace Soviet with Russia. Russian pressure on the Near East. Well, Russia definitely does have interest in the Middle East. They have a naval base in Syria that's still there, last I checked. They definitely have a presence in Iran. They are very deep allies with the Iranians. And so the Russians see what the Americans and the Israelis are doing against Iran, one of Russia's biggest allies, and a very important ally for Russia, geostrategically speaking, because Iran lies right on Russia's underbelly, that Russia is being pressured to put more pressure on this whole situation. Russia is being put into a situation where it has to put pressure on the Americans to stop this, on the Israelis to stop this. And also, just to add something here, he says that if we continue the alliance that we have with Israel in the manner that we are doing it, close and increasing ties with our Israeli ally will, over the long run, probably confront the United States with substantially more expense, risk, and diplomatic isolation. It's definitely increasing our expense because of the Middle East. Absolutely. Trillions of dollars have been spent in the Middle East. It's definitely increasing our risk. Israel acts very recklessly, and that puts our interest at risk in the Middle East. Absolutely. So again, Hal Ford's prediction was correct. And he says here, one has to acknowledge that something markedly different is needed in long-range U.S. Middle East policies. Serious consideration of realistic alternatives is badly needed now. So he says here that we need an alternative to the way that we are maintaining our alliance with Israel. We are way too deep in this alliance. We are very much so indiscriminate in how we deal with the Israelis. We do not deal with the Israelis with putting restraint on them. We do not deal with the Israelis with harsh criticism. We baby the Israelis. We allow them to do what they want, and we allow them to get away with it. And so Hal Ford, this CIA analyst, is saying, unless we change the nature of our alliance, it's going to be to our detriment. And it says here, this is in no way a new conclusion. It has been voiced by many to date. The only problem is that the U.S.-Israeli relationship continues basically unchanged on its present losing course. So he's saying here that the American-Israeli alliance is a losing course. It's a course that we are continuously treading upon, and we are going to inevitably lose because of that. It's going to be to our detriment. And look at where we are now. Look at where we are. Decades after Hal Ford made this warning. We are now kissing up to the Russians, to the Iranians, and to the Chinese because of a war that Israel pulled us into. And we are exposing all of the limits of our empire because of the war that Israel pulled us into. And we are allowing Israel to act recklessly without any serious consequences, with really no consequences. We watched as Israel blew up oil depots and bombed the biggest gas field in the world, to the point where it got so bad that Donald Trump had to throw Israel under the bus by saying, Iran, please, don't bomb Qatar, because the Israelis hit Iran's gas field, the Pars gas field, and Iran retaliated by bombing the Qataris. And the Americans said, no, please, don't hit the Qataris. It wasn't Qatar, it was Israel. Donald Trump threw Israel under the bus, thus showing yet another crack on the American-Israeli alliance, and thus showing yet another sign of the rift between America and Israel, and thus showing yet another sign of the future end of the American-Israeli alliance.